The greatest invasion in the history of warfare was being prepared, and it could not be hidden. You cannot conceal the gathering of vast armies, the massing of ships, the buildup of the immense force required for such an undertaking. The enemy knew an invasion was coming. The only question was where it would fall, and on the answer to that single question hung the fate of the entire operation, the lives of countless soldiers, and perhaps the outcome of the war itself. So the planners did something extraordinary. They did not try to hide the invasion. Instead, they created a second invasion, a phantom army that existed almost entirely in the realm of radio signals and deception, and they used it to make the enemy look in exactly the wrong direction. This is the story of one of the most important and successful deceptions in the history of warfare, an elaborate illusion that protected the most consequential operation of the war. It is a story about misdirection on a grand scale, about creating an entire fictional army to draw the enemy's attention away from the real threat. And it reveals the profound power of controlling where your enemy looks, of ensuring that their strength is concentrated in the wrong place at the decisive moment. To understand the magnitude of this deception, you have to understand the problem it was designed to solve, which was perhaps the most critical problem of the entire war in the West. The invasion would be the great turning point, the moment when Allied forces would return in strength to the continent and begin the final push toward victory. But amphibious invasions, as we have discussed, are extraordinarily dangerous, and this one would be the largest and most ambitious ever attempted. The attacking forces would be at their most vulnerable as they crossed the water and established their foothold. If the enemy knew where the invasion would land and concentrated their forces there, the result could be catastrophe, the invasion thrown back into the sea with horrific losses. The enemy, of course, understood that an invasion was coming, and they had been preparing for it. They had fortified the coast, built defenses, and positioned their forces to respond to the attack. But the coast was long, and they could not be equally strong everywhere. They had to make choices about where to concentrate their strongest defenses and their mobile reserves, and these choices depended on their assessment of where the invasion was most likely to fall. If they guessed correctly, they could meet the invasion with overwhelming force. If they guessed wrong, if their strength was concentrated in the wrong place, the invasion might succeed before they could redeploy to meet it. The entire operation hinged on the enemy's assessment of where the blow would land. This created an extraordinary opportunity for deception. If the planners could influence the enemy's assessment, if they could convince the enemy that the invasion would fall in one place when it would actually fall in another, they could ensure that the enemy's strength was concentrated in the wrong location. They could draw the enemy's forces away from the real landing site, leaving it less defended, while the enemy waited for an attack that would never come at a different location. This was the goal of the Great Deception, to manipulate the enemy's understanding of the invasion's target, to make them defend against a phantom while the real blow fell elsewhere. Now we should be honest about the history here, because this deception operation was real and is genuinely regarded as one of the most successful in the history of warfare, though we will describe its workings in general terms. What follows is a retelling grounded in the actual existence of this elaborate deception, and the real impact it had on the invasion, told as a narrative to convey its full significance. The core is true. There really was a massive deception operation that used a phantom army and false signals to mislead the enemy about the location of the invasion, and it really did succeed in drawing enemy attention and forces away from the actual landing site. The details are recounted to illuminate just how brilliant and consequential this deception truly was. The centerpiece of the deception was the creation of a phantom army, a fictional force that appeared to be massing for an invasion at a location different from the real one. This phantom army existed primarily in the realm of signals and deception rather than in physical reality. It was conjured into apparent existence through a variety of means, the most important of which was the manipulation of radio communications. The planners understood that the enemy was listening to radio traffic, trying to detect the buildup and movements of forces. So they generated the radio traffic that a real army would produce, creating the electronic signature of a massive force gathering for an invasion at the false location. This was a brilliant exploitation of how the enemy gathered intelligence. Armies generate enormous amounts of radio communication, the chatter of units coordinating, reporting, and receiving orders. By monitoring this traffic, even without breaking the codes, an enemy can learn a great deal about the size, location, and activity of forces. The deception planners turned this against the enemy. They created fake radio traffic, simulating the communications of a vast army that did not really exist, transmitting the signals from the location where they wanted the enemy to believe the invasion would come. To the enemy's listening posts, the radio traffic indicated a massive force gathering for an attack exactly as a real army would. The radio deception was reinforced by other elements that added to the illusion. Physical decoys, as we have discussed in the context of inflatable armies, could contribute to the impression of a force massing at the false location. False information fed through other channels, including the kind of turned agents we explored, could reinforce the deception, confirming to the enemy that the invasion would come at the place the planners wanted them to expect. All of these elements worked together to create a coherent and convincing illusion, a phantom army that the enemy believed was real, gathering at a location far from the actual invasion site. The genius of the deception lay in its comprehensiveness and its credibility. For the enemy to be fooled, the illusion had to be convincing from every angle. The radio traffic had to be realistic. The other intelligence indicators had to align. The whole picture had to cohere into a believable impression of a real invasion threat at the false location. And, crucially, the deception had to exploit the enemy's existing assumptions and expectations. If the enemy already considered the false location a likely invasion site, the deception would reinforce what they were already inclined to believe, making it all the more convincing. The planners crafted their illusion to play upon the enemy's own preconceptions, making the false threat seem not just plausible, but probable. The effect of this elaborate deception was profound. The enemy, deceived by the phantom army and the false signals, came to believe that the main invasion would fall at the location the planners wanted them to expect. As a result, they concentrated significant forces there, holding them in readiness to meet an invasion that would never come at that place. They kept powerful reserves positioned to respond to the phantom threat, reserves that might otherwise have been used against the real invasion. The deception drew the enemy's attention and strength toward the false location, away from the actual landing site, exactly as the planners had intended. And here is what makes the deception so remarkable, the way it continued to work even after the real invasion began. When the actual invasion was launched, the enemy faced a critical decision. Was this the real invasion, or was it a diversion meant to draw their forces away from the true attack, which would still come at the location they had been led to expect? The deception had been so successful that the enemy hesitated, uncertain whether the landing was the main event or a feint. This uncertainty was crucial because it delayed the enemy's response, caused them to hold back forces that might have been thrown against the invasion, and gave the attacking forces precious time to establish their foothold. The Phantom Army continued to influence the enemy's decisions even as the real invasion unfolded. There is a profound principle at work here about the power of misdirection. The deception did not try to hide the fact that an invasion was coming, which would have been impossible. Instead, it controlled where the enemy expected the invasion to fall, drawing their attention and strength to the wrong place. This is the essence of misdirection, not concealing the existence of a threat, but controlling perception of its nature and location. By creating a phantom threat that seemed more significant than the real one, the planners ensured that the enemy's defenses were misdirected, concentrated against an illusion, while the real blow fell where the enemy was weaker. This principle of misdirection has applications far beyond warfare, in any contest where perception can be manipulated. The key insight is that you do not always need to hide your intentions completely, which is often impossible. Sometimes it is more effective to control where your opponent focuses their attention, to draw their concern toward one thing while you act on another. The Great Invasion deception was a masterful application of this principle on the largest possible scale, a demonstration that controlling an enemy's focus can be as valuable as hiding your plans entirely, and often more achievable. Consider, too, the extraordinary coordination and sophistication that the deception required. Creating a convincing phantom army involved orchestrating multiple elements: the radio deception, the physical decoys, the false intelligence, all working together to create a coherent illusion. This required careful planning, meticulous attention to detail, and a deep understanding of how the enemy gathered and assessed intelligence. The planners had to think like the enemy, to anticipate what would be convincing, to craft an illusion that would withstand scrutiny. It was an achievement of immense complexity, a triumph of careful planning and psychological insight. It is worth reflecting on the stakes that made this deception so vital. The invasion was perhaps the single most important operation of the war in the West, the great gamble on which so much depended. Its success was far from guaranteed, and the margin between success and catastrophe was narrow. Anything that could improve the odds, that could give the attacking forces an advantage, was of enormous value. The deception, by drawing enemy forces away from the landing site and delaying their response, contributed significantly to the success of the invasion. It helped ensure that the attacking forces faced a less concentrated defense, that they had time to establish their foothold, that the great gamble paid off. In this sense, the deception helped to make possible one of the decisive moments of the war. There is a deep lesson here about the value of cleverness in achieving great objectives. The invasion required immense physical force, vast armies and fleets, and the courage of countless soldiers. But it also required cleverness, the intelligence to deceive the enemy and improve the odds of success. The combination of force and cleverness was far more powerful than force alone. The deception did not replace the need for a powerful invasion force, but it multiplied the effectiveness of that force by ensuring it faced more favorable conditions. This marriage of physical power and intellectual cunning is often the key to success in the most challenging endeavors. Consider the contrast between the brute force approach and the approach that incorporated deception. A purely brute force approach would have launched the invasion and relied on overwhelming power to succeed regardless of the enemy's defenses, accepting whatever losses resulted. The approach that incorporated deception sought to improve the odds, to reduce the losses, to increase the chances of success by manipulating the enemy's response. This was both more effective and more humane, achieving the objective while reducing the cost in lives. It reflected an understanding that the cleverest path to victory is often the one that combines force with cunning, that achieves the objective not through power alone, but through the intelligent application of power combined with deception. What makes this story endure is the sheer scale and audacity of the deception, the idea that you could conjure an entire phantom army out of radio signals and illusions and use it to protect the greatest invasion in history. It captures something essential about the role of intelligence and deception in warfare, about the profound power of controlling where your enemy looks. The great invasion deception was not a weapon of steel, but a weapon of mind, an elaborate illusion that shaped the enemy's decisions at the most critical moment. It stands as one of the great triumphs of military deception, a demonstration that the battle for perception can be as decisive as the battle on the ground. By the time the war ended, the great invasion deception had earned its place among the most successful military deceptions in history, an elaborate illusion that had helped protect the most consequential operation of the war. The Phantom Army, conjured from radio signals and decoys and false intelligence, had drawn the enemy's attention and strength away from the real landing site, had delayed their response, and had contributed significantly to the success of the invasion. It was a triumph of misdirection on the grandest scale, a demonstration that controlling where the enemy looks can be one of the most powerful weapons of all. So remember the greatest invasion in history, which could not be hidden, and the brilliant deception that protected it not by concealment, but by misdirection. Remember the Phantom Army, conjured from radio signals and illusions, that drew the enemy's gaze to the wrong place while the real blow fell elsewhere. And remember the profound truth at the heart of it all, that you do not always need to hide your intentions to deceive your enemy, that controlling where they focus their attention can be just as powerful, and that the greatest victories often come from the marriage of overwhelming force with the cunning to ensure that force falls where the enemy least expects it.